Yes, straightway diving into the conversation. Let's make it more conversational. Uh, Let me start, Ms. Raghunathan, with a basic question of the trigger that an author finds to write on the subject. Of course, you have worked closely on this, but then to find time and write it down, what was the inspiration?
I would say a couple of things which came together. You know, I do write a lot anyway. I blog on a very regular basis. I have written several books, but this one was inspired by one major life event, which was retirement, and the other major world event, which was COVID. So I happened to step down from a very active role in CSR in the middle of COVID. And I said, wow, what better opportunity. So I bummed around for a few months, of course. I mean, you know, you think it's so much fun. You don't have to worry about, you know, going to work the next day and tackling difficult decisions. So that's always there. But after that, you know, it begins to pall a bit. And since it was the middle of COVID, I said, wow, great. Now, let me try to put down a book on CSR, which is what I've been working on for 15 years. And it seemed the logical thing to do. And it was also logical because I had encountered in my 15 years of career the amount of confusion around this term CSR, or corporate social responsibility. It was like the elephant that we talk about. Somebody gets hold of the tail, somebody gets hold of the trunk, somebody gets hold of the legs. And I could see that nobody clearly had a holistic picture of what it was and how it is to be, and there is a law around it, as you know, which was enacted in 2014. And it's a very complicated kind of law, with many little nuances and operational details, and everybody used to be very confused, or we all are. I continue to be confused about operationalizing the law. I remember during my career, every now and then, we had to keep checking with maybe the company secretary, the chartered accountant, somebody to interpret the law and say exactly what is right and what is wrong. And having encountered all that, I thought, come on, let me put my experience to some good use. And try to see if I can make a little more sense out of it for my peers and colleagues who are in the CSR space.
You mentioned COVID, and through this IBLF chapters, I have seen a lot of authors, you know, where COVID was the inspiration. I think what COVID has brought us back is to this printed book format as well. I think we have to maybe do a session around it. But, you know, for most of the people, you know, CSR, of course, happens to be something which appears to be a tick mark. That's why what, you know, in my conversation with some of the industry leaders, they say, is it so, I mean, it's just a tick mark, or is it driven by that ethos of creating some actual social impact?
This is, you know, again, a part of the confusion that has been brought about by the law. It's not like CSR was not happening. Corporate social responsibility is something that across the world has been practiced in the true sense of the word, and India is no exception. India, they say, maybe a century ago, India and Japan were the two Asian countries which had this ethos of CSR. We think back to institutions like the Indian Institute of Science. What created that? You think back to the Tatas. What is that? That is corporate social responsibility. Everything that they do. They were the first to introduce, for instance, the concept of Provident Fund out of care for their key stakeholder employees. The government followed much later. Or working hours, working conditions. They created creches for their employees more than 100 years ago. So the concept of corporate social responsibility has been very deep in some companies. Probably a minority, but we cannot discount that. And how seriously they have taken it and built their business on a responsible basis. But why it has become a tick mark? First, it became a fashion. You know, before, in the late 1990s, it was a fashion, you know. I think industrialists, the big guys, would meet around a table and say, I am supporting 100 schools, and somebody would say, I am building a hospital. So it became like a, Me Too kind of conversation. And I have seen that. Philanthropists and, CSR. And of course, we still have that confusion between philanthropy and CSR. But it was a fashionable thing to do. And more people were getting onto the bandwagon because they could see that the big guys were talking about it, doing it. And then there came this law. 2013, just to remind ourselves, the Companies Act, which was a, kind of very old dinosaurian kind of act, the whole thing was revamped. And one of the new ideas introduced in that, in a very landmark section called Section 135, was certain companies of a certain size, and it is defined, will spend 2% of the average profits of the last 3 years on some cause. So they can decide on education or health or, old age or whatever they want. So they have to have a policy, they have to have a plan, they have to have a committee. And this kind of put the pressure on ticking the box. As long as it was voluntary, people were coming to it out of an evolved sense of their responsibility. But the moment a law came in and said, all of these companies have to do it, or else. Initially, actually, it was a soft law. It said, you tell me why you didn't do it if you didn't do it. But then companies started getting notices. Why you didn't spend 2%? And where did you spend it? How did you spend it? And there was panic. Because if you look at it, a company is not geared to do social service, right? A company is geared to do its business. Yeah. And suddenly you had to do this. So there was a lot of scrambling around. And at one point, the law changed scarily enough to say, I will put you in jail if you don't do this. There was a penal clause brought about 2 years back. Fortunately, within 2-3 months, the penal clause was removed. But it is still a civil offense. So that people responsible for CSR may be fined, apart from the company being fined. So now it's a bit of a panic situation. Companies don't know how to do it. Now in the 10 years it has improved, but they didn't know what to do, how to do. They had no people to do it, and yet they were being held responsible. So obviously it became like a tick mark, but I think over time it will settle down and people are beginning to understand that they can make a difference.
Right. If you look at sectoral, sectors that are receiving CSR funding, is it, limited to certain sectors, or is it inclusive? What are the fault lines in that space?
The law, section 135, there is a schedule called Schedule 7 attached to it, which lists what counts as CSR. So it begins with education, it goes on to health, it says, women empowerment, it says environment. So there are 17 or so such areas. But the analysis of data over the last 10 years reveals that education, the head called education, is receiving 30 to 35% of all the funds. And for instance, sports is also one of the things. Sports, people involved in sports will say it is less than 1% that we are getting. Somebody else in environment will say we are not getting much. So there is, and I think that is instinctive kind of thing. All of us interact with, for instance, IT companies. They keep recruiting year after year, and they see that the basic education has not been strong. So they go back and say, oh, school education is weak. STEM education is weak. So let us support schools. So it's kind of instinctive because that's what you see around you.
So there's not much thought into it. You're saying that it's just, again, something which is already what people are doing, you also tend to spend there.
I wouldn't say there's not much thought. See, I as a company don't have to think from a national perspective. That is not this thing. What is the problem hitting me or I am seeing? And what could be my response to it? For instance, an IT company doing IT education in schools or putting computers into school makes a lot of sense for them, right? So I think everybody is looking at it from their perspective and also seeing what is easy to do, what they have the capacity to do. So if you tell a Bangalore-based IT company work in, remote rural Northeast, taking health facilities, they say, I don't have a clue. I don't know what to do. What is it that I'm supposed to do? So, I will say nothing is ever enough. Whatever you do in education is not going to be enough to bring up the quality of education. So let everybody add their bit.
Right. So I have these numbers that in 2022, CSR fell by 4%, what are the positive stories of CSR? We hear this, that it's sectoral limited, is falling down, it's a tick mark, but what are the positives of the CSR story?
Actually, the fall in 2022 can be explained very clearly by COVID, just like several books came out during COVID. Profits fell, right? Previous 3 years, and that is the basis of the CSR calculations, profits fell. So obviously your CSR spend is going to go down. As I said, I think CSR is slowly, it sometimes happens. You begin with a gun on the head, which forces people to change habits, and then it becomes a habit that you do yourself. So I would say in the case of CSR, that is happening. Because you're forced to do it, conscientious companies, conscientious boards will say, okay, now that we have to do it, let us do it well. So that is something that is happening. It is getting professionalized. Previously, what used to happen, and it still happens, Are kaun hai? Who is the guy who's most unemployed in this whole company? Put him in charge of CSR, because we have to do the CSR. Okay, who seems to have spare capacity? Oh, okay, that HR guy, he can, he's about 70% occupied. Give him CSR as an extra portfolio. But now that is changing. So the whole thing is professionalizing. The recognition that it has to be professional is coming up. There's an emphasis on measuring impact, seeing what difference you actually made on the ground. Previously, I used to be happy, oh, I put 10 computers in a school. But now I'm worried, were those computers working all through the year? Was there a trained teacher to teach the students? And let me measure whether the children have really learned to use the computers. So it's going from input to slowly looking at impact.
If you look at the last couple of years, even last 4 or 5 years, there has been this trend of top industrialists giving away health, to charity. Mr. Premji, Bill Gates, and a lot of people, in fact, after that, we've been hearing constant string of stories. How has that helped to shape a new mindset among young leaders?
Absolutely, and I think Bangalore can proudly say that it has some of the biggest philanthropists who've done some of the biggest donations. Mr. Azim Premji being there, Mr. and Mrs. Neelakemi, they're all in the list of people who have pledged their wealth. So we're very proud of that. And I would say also middle class giving. It's not just the rich guys who are giving. There is a move for everybody in society to start giving. I think it's a very healthy trend. And when you look at news, for instance, of people giving away half their wealth, I'm also kind of inclined to see. And I think the reality also is that we realize that our children may not need what we leave them, right? Give them a great education. The parents of a young entrepreneur, the few crores that they can leave him is not going to make any difference. The earning power of young people has gone up so much that parents no longer feel forced to, worry about them and their next generation. So I have the liberty to give away my money to causes that I believe in. Wealth levels are increasing. So I think all of that is leading to a kind of increase in philanthropy.
So let me bring in the audience here. Maybe I can ask my rest of the questions post that. This gentleman at the back, we can hand over the mic.
Hello, I am Ramamurthy, madam. Incidentally, I am a shareholder in GMR Group. Okay. Now, what I want to ask you is, what are the main activities you are like a school and education you are funding, and what is your contribution to Bangalore and Karnataka in terms of CSR?
That question is for the GMR Group?
You're representing a GMR.
Maybe during your tenure.
I
Okay.
no longer work with the GMR group. As I said, I've retired, but I can still answer that question.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
The GMR group's approach, as is the approach of many corporates, is to work in areas which you are physically present in, and that is what the law encourages. The GMR group works in education, health, livelihoods, and skill development. The corporate headquarters used to be here till about 8 years ago, and we were very active in running a skill center, running schools for children of migrant labor, health activities. But since the corporate headquarters moved, slowly the CSR activities in Bangalore have been phased down to take place in, say, Hyderabad or Delhi, where we have the airports, or Goa and things like that.
Any other question? Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. Two words, charity and philanthropy. Very confusing. So in my mind, I see charity as giving and philanthropy doing.
Doing.
Doing. Okay, when you actually actively participate, etc. I find that most of the CSRs are towards charity oriented rather than philanthropy. There are organizations, but very few. Since you're kind of right in the middle of it, would you correct or endorse my view? That's one. Anyway, okay, let's stick to that question.
Okay. Well, I see charity as the example we often use is charity is you see somebody who's got a fever and you give him Saridon or Dolo, as is the fashion these days. In philanthropy, you take that guy in and say, why do you have a fever? Do X number of tests and then proceed on a treatment to treat the underlying causes. So for me, that's the difference between charity and philanthropy. One is symptomatic, one is, getting deeper into causes. So philanthropy tries to tackle the underlying causes of poverty or lack of education or lack of health. I would say that most instinctively, charity is how it begins. The giving impulse, whether individually or institutionally, is charity. That, when something touches you, you see people shivering in the cold in the Delhi night, your instinct is to give blankets. That's how it begins, and then you get into it. So it's a process of maturation, and I think that Indian corporates are moving pretty fast into philanthropy and strategic CSR.
Thank you, because you've answered my second question.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Shreya. You can give the mic, please. Yeah.
Hi, just saw you.
Yes, hi. So, in terms of, we see a lot of pictures of, people, professionals working in the corporates that you talked about and a lot of others. While there is a CSR angle and which is a monetary angle also, but there's also this whole 2% or whatever that good change has happened is also encouraging a lot of professionals to step out and give some part of their time to some of these causes. So if you can, share some light on that, do you think it's a good trend what has happened, the good silver lining to this law? That is one. And two is, I want to understand, or I'm curious to know from you, are there, we come from a field that recognizes, marketing, the best marketing practices, the best advertising campaigns. So when it comes to CSR, are there some very good awards that companies participate in? What are those 2-3 great, platforms that recognize this work?
Sure. Thanks for those questions. Actually, the first question was employee engagement. Now, employee engagement traditionally across the world has been understood as one of the reasons why CSR should be done, because the moment your employees, see that the company is doing good, it is a great feeling for you. It is a great opportunity to use your professional skills if they can facilitate that. For instance, we've had accounts and finance people going and teaching the communities about financial literacy. Or as I said, software engineers developing apps for development. So there's no better way if a company can give that structured channel And, I really encourage any HR people around here to facilitate that. But the sad thing is that the law doesn't recognize this contribution. The law makes no mention of it doesn't even say we encourage companies to, involve their employees. They in fact say you cannot monetize your employee time into your CSR spend. There are often ways, when, for instance, if there's a disaster, company says, we will match employee contribution, but that employee contribution cannot be counted in a CSR spend. So the law does nothing for what is one of the most powerful aspects of CSR. So I am very, and there's been a lot of lobbying around that, so we hope that something will happen. Regarding rewards, I will say there are just too many awards and rewards in the CSR space because it's become the fashionable term, right? So everybody, and it's a bit scary because a lot of fly-by-night operators have sprung up just to take advantage of this. They will charge anything from 50,000 to 1 lakh to 2 lakhs for you to apply, and they will give a reward. So it's a bit scary. But having said that, there are lots of very respectable awards. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs itself, the most respected award is that one. And then agencies like TERI or, things like that. But anybody wanting to apply for a CSR award, please check the credentials. I mean, you have to evaluate the evaluator before you let the evaluator evaluate you.
Right. So let me ask the last two questions. We have a few minutes left. What is the sense of awareness among where the publishing platform, like we're talking about books, was it easier to find a publisher, by the way? Were they open to this kind of an, theme, which only select people would understand?
Not too difficult. I'm grateful to Harper for actually seeing the potential of the subject and coming forward. I would say that, it is not a very popular subject, but it is something gaining importance. Right from boards, because they are charged with the responsibility, down to business schools where, responsible business and things like that, sustainability and social responsibility are being discussed. So I hope, and NGOs. NGOs are the implementing partners for corporates usually. So there's also a lot of interest among NGOs. So corporates, NGOs, business schools, I hope will, find this useful. But yes, it's not the most oofy topic under the sun.
The media has been not paid enough attention. I read somewhere you mentioned that. Is it so?
No, I think sometimes what becomes the focus of media attention is some, companies which push through their press releases. It needn't be a very significant thing. Or it is a big project. So the real operational stories of challenges, failures, and successes don't often get covered.
My last question, how can companies build a culture of giving, not just as something which has to be done professionally, but which touches the core and is beyond the compliance part of it? What are the ways to build that as we move on?
I think it has to start two ways. Company boards, they are usually made of very wise, very experienced, and very mature people. I think they have to set the tone. Kind of send the message across that CSR is viewed not as a tick box in this company, but we see it as a central part of strategy, business strategy, and how do you integrate the two? And it again has to begin at the other way. Business schools have to talk about this issue. I think it's very important because the more young people come up who are tuned already and join the ranks of business and the top down, somewhere it will be.
Wonderful. That was Miss Meena Raghunathan. Can we have a round of applause for her? And her books are available outside. You can get your signed copy and take a picture with her as well. Thank you so much, Ms. Raghunathan.